past Dombås, which is actually quite sort of it's a scary thought really, because that Dombås is a beautiful town right in the middle of the mountains, and it was where Papa Sven was destined to go to the Nazi headquarters. He was being taken on the way to the headquarters when he escaped in June of 1944. And it belies, although there was the horror of that, the countryside around is just spectacular.
Ellie is on a train travelling northwards from Oslo to Andalsnes. The town of Dombås, which he just passed through, was where her father Sven was being taken, expecting to be shot by the Gestapo in 1944. This recording of Sven describing what happened to him was made by the BBC after his escape to England in 1944 and was broadcast to Norway. He's describing his interrogation when he was told, "You'll be taken to prison and tried. Nobody will believe your story. You'll be shot as a spy." Fortunately, he escaped before he reached the town. With her in the compartment are her son Oliver, her friend Linda, and Ellie's sister Julie and brother Bert, who are about to retrace the route of their father's flight to Sweden 60 years ago. It'll be a 200-mile trek across some of the highest and most inhospitable mountains in Norway. Norway was invaded by the Germans in April 1940, 7 months after the outbreak of World War II. Within 48 hours of the invasion, a Norwegian Nazi sympathiser, Vidkun Quisling, had proclaimed himself head of the government. A few weeks later, King Haakon and his government escaped to England. In his book, A Biologist on the Run, Sven recounts the remarkable tale of his flight and how his life came to balance on the goodwill of his countrymen. The Norwegians were incensed at the occupation of their country by the Germans. On the very first page of the book, Sven describes how strongly they felt.
We saw German officers and troops making themselves at home in our capital. We saw them marching through our streets, heard and hated the sound of their clacking boots. The officers always shouted. We became fed up with their songs, their marching, their shouting and their smell. I believe it was their boots. It was a smell of harsh fats when they'd been marching by. People spoke angrily of the Germans having invaded our fatherland. What a bad man, this Hitler. An old woman said, someone should go and speak to him.
3 months after the invasion, Sven was appointed principal of a school for fishermen on the island of Gossen in western Norway. His was a position of some importance locally, but he soon found that, in addition to running the school, increasingly he had to negotiate with the occupying powers to try and prevent a takeover of the school buildings. But he had to be careful not to overstep the mark.
The soldiers didn't show any respect, as long as I called myself schoolmaster. But as soon as I started employing the term director, their respect increased accordingly. It is no use whatsoever to try to speak politely or with friendliness to a German soldier. That was regarded as a sign of weakness or fear, and only produced rudeness. But given orders, the stricter the better. They always obeyed immediately and almost humbly. Although I was a civilian, even the officers obeyed me, provided I gave my orders firmly.
As a patriotic Norwegian, Sven felt he had to wage a one-man war of resistance in his own remote area. Primrose, his second wife, an Englishwoman whom he married in 1950, and the mother of Ellie Julian Burt, describes how he started.
He was printing this illegal newspaper while he was in the fishery. He kept his illegal radio, his little radio. They were all confiscated, and used to listen in the cellar at his house. He began to took down the speeches, Churchill's speeches and all those things, which were a wonderful rallying thing for the Allies. And he began to print them. And he realized that out there in near Molde on the coast, the people didn't realize what was going on because the Germans were very clever at propaganda and printed all kinds of lies about things that were happening in the rest of Norway. And he travelled a lot. He had an excuse to travel, and he went round to Andalsnes and Ålesund and all these places and posted these letters in the pillar boxes, always trying to make sure that nobody was watching him posting them, because, of course, that was very hazardous to do that.
In 1942, he was recruited by a larger resistance network run from Oslo. He was given a Leica camera and instructions to gather information about the activities of the occupying powers on the island. He was not a natural spy. As a marine biologist, he was more at home with salmon and trout than codes and invisible ink. For 2 years, he carried out the instructions of his Oslo handlers successfully. But on the 19th of June 1944, 13 days after the D-Day landings in France, he came unstuck. He was spotted by a German guard when he was photographing a submarine station on a neighbouring island.
He went out with his camera and onto the cliffs near the islands there, and he was photographing a U-boat site. And the crows made a frightful fuss about him. You know, the birds got up. And so he always said, well, that was really justice, because he was living off crows. He caught a lot of them in his traps. And he used to send them to Oslo to his friends, because they were very short of food then. And he said, oh, well, there we are. They gave me away.
Sven was in serious trouble.
I took 8 or 9 pictures. I had a very good view of the station, so I felt sure I had secured some good shots. I suddenly noticed 2 or 3 soldiers running at full speed out of the station, gun in hand, steel helmets on their heads. Soon there were about 15 of them running towards the hills. Yes, towards me. When I passed a big stone, I took the camera and equipment. There was a hole into the stone, and I put everything down there, covered it with heather, and tried to make it look as natural as possible. I went on towards the slope where I could get down. Suddenly, a shot was fired behind me. The bullet threw some earth in the air just in front of me, and a voice roared, "Halt!" I surrendered, unconditionally.
It ended in him being taken as a prisoner onto the ferry, and then he was put on the boat in the quay in Molde to be taken to Andalsnes. And of course a lot of his friends saw him going and realized what was happening. He went on, and he had one guard tied to him, and this man, he was quite a kind, decent sort of man. I don't think he was a German. I think he was a Czechoslovakian or something, or one of these commandeered Nazi people. They were given a cabin, and Sven was handcuffed then. He'd been lucky and managed to persuade this guard to undo his handcuffs, because it's awfully difficult to sleep with your hands in handcuffs. And the man had undone them, but of course the cabin door was locked. In the middle of the night, Sven woke and realized that the chap had gone to sleep.
Opposite me, sitting on the edge of his berth, was my guard, asleep, his chin resting on his breast. No wonder. He had told me that this was his 3rd night in succession on duty. This situation appeared to me as a possibility of escape. Then, to test if my guard was sound asleep, I said, "I must get out." He didn't stir. I looked for my guard's pistol, but he had slumped down over it, so I couldn't get it without awakening him. Then, stealthily, I slid out of the cabin and closed the door carefully behind me. I went up the stairs leading to the deck entrances. Both the doors were locked. I was trapped. Apparently nothing to do but go down to my guard again. I already had my hand on the door handle when the thought struck me. There was a corridor leading under the deck to the front of the ship. Near the front end of the corridor, there were some people speaking together. Well, that was that. I had to pass them. There was the staircase leading to the foredeck. The mate was at the winch unloading the wares that were to be sent on the train later in the morning. On the pier, just where I had to go ashore, there was a German sentry with his gun. Nothing but impudence can do it, I thought, and with a cheerio as gay as I could produce it, I waved to the mate and stepped ashore beside the sentry. The mate gave me a broad smile and went on unloading. The sentry did not stir. I looked at my watch. It was 2:15 a.m.
The temptation to run was almost irresistible. But he still had to pass 4 more German sentries without arousing their suspicion. One at the railway station, one at the German barracks, one at the bridge over the railway, and the last one at the locomotive yard. Finally, he reached the outskirts of the town.
Suddenly I jumped from the middle of the road sideways into one of the small streams and started climbing the slope. The hounds could not trace any scent in the stream. For 1 or 2 hours I walked smaller and bigger burns, mostly upstream towards the mountains. Every now and then I listened. But nothing could be heard, except the rushing sounds of the small burns and the birds, which had started singing.
For the moment, he was free. He estimated he had about 45 minutes in which to get well clear of the town before his guard woke up. Thus began his 8-week flight eastwards across the mountains to Sweden and safety. And this was the epic journey which Ellie and her companions were to recreate.
My plan was to head for one of the Isfjord valleys and try to get across the mountains to the Eikersdal Valley. Suddenly there came over me a strong sense of freedom and joy. I had escaped torture, imprisonment, and death. I was free, like the birds singing around me. Life was ahead of me. I was an outlaw. I was free, free, free.
Eventually, he came across 2 men cutting wood, and they had a wary conversation, he thinking that they may be Nazi sympathisers, and they thinking that he might be a German agent.
When I felt sure that these 2 men were not Nazis, I said, "I have escaped from German captivity today, and I'm trying to get across the mountains." They replied, "You can't get across the mountains alone. There is a precipice at the end of the valley. Only local people know how to get up there."
After resting in a farm hut on some hay, he set off again when it got dark towards the village of Isfjorden.
It was nearly midnight, 22 hours since my escape, and I had seen no Germans yet. They would not get me. Suddenly there was a rush in the bushes near the path. A girl came towards me. It was far too late to hide. She ran up to me and seized my hand and said, "Don't be afraid. We've come to help you. My brother and a friend are up at the precipice looking for you. They'll soon be here. There's a barn across the river where we will hide you. We've brought dry stockings and food for you. Come along to the barn." Again, I surrendered unconditionally.
The girl's name was Rania, and she took him to meet her brother André and another boy. They told him how the Germans had searched every house in Andalsnes for him, sending soldiers in every direction and several bloodhounds. The Oslo Express had been detained for 8 hours.
André looked at my shoes. They were thin and worn and soaked from snow and wading. You can't cross a mountain in those shoes. Try my boots to see if they fit. He had brand new solid boots, just my size, and we changed on the spot.
Ellie and her party wanted to visit Isfjorden to make contact with some of the people who had helped her father. Selma, in particular, had prepared a special surprise. She presented them with Sven's original shoes, something Ellie and Julie were still talking about several days later as they trudged down a windy valley.
Så står det i en sangstrofe, og det vil jeg kunne ønske. Må vi bli i himmelen sammen.
Wasn't that a most amazing moment when she gave us those shoes?
Oh, Selma. I just wanted to, well, I was laughing and crying at the same time. I just felt overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
It suddenly felt like an incredibly sort of joyous moment that she'd bothered to keep these shoes for 60 years. She nearly threw them out, didn't she?
She did. She said she thought a few years ago, and you know they could have gone up in the fire.
Yes, they could.
In the house.
And Selma's speech was so moving. And she, at one point, she played a note on the piano to give herself the right key for a song. And I thought, oh dear, this is going to be a little embarrassing because she's quite elderly.
Herre, gjør meg stille, stille kun for deg. Glad for den lille, og få offre meg. Nåde gir.
And she sang a hymn in perfect pitch, in the most beautiful voice, no tremble. It was just so moving and heartfelt. She was just a very, very warm and wonderfully motherly person, wasn't she? I mean, it just seemed all very, very fitting and acknowledging what we were doing. Although we didn't understand most of it because she
Very
has a broad
broad.
Romsdal dialect.
Yeah. And she said in her letter, I have a little present for you from that time. I had no idea. I thought maybe it's a piece of paper
Or a compass.
that Papa had written
Sensible.
on. Something, yeah. And the last thing on my mind was the shoes because I didn't know who had had them. And she brought out this sort of brown paper bag.
And of course it was her brother who gave him his brand new Viking mountain shoes.
Yeah,
So off he went in those.
yeah. But she, you know, when she laid them into my hands and I just opened that packet, it was, as you say, it was almost as if Papa had walked into the room.
Yes.
Just the most amazing, and I
think he was in those shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I threw my arms around her and just wept because it was just such a wonderful moment. And as you say, it was just pure joy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Seeing the shoes and a very moving moment as well. So it's Wednesday and we've started, and we've got Oddmund Onyam, he's at the beginning of the line. There's 6 of us climbing up through the valley of a mountain, and it's steep, but it's our first day.
And we're 5 minutes into it and Ollie's sweating.
And to the left of us is the most magnificent river. It's cascading right down through the gorge, absolutely beautiful. And all the way up there are blueberries and
some other berries, and I can't remember what he said they were. Kärbär or something. And Juni and I keep stopping and eating the blueberries because it takes us back to our childhood. Now you can hear the waterfall, which is one of the waterfalls. Difficult to describe, really, but in a nutshell, awesome. It's just beautiful, and behind us is the valley and then more mountains, and there are some little wildflowers here, and we've left a lot of our equipment behind, and that's coming up by car tomorrow up to Eikersdal, which is where we're heading for. So here we are at the top of our first mountain, and it's taken us nearly 2 hours to get to the top, and we're feeling extremely frivolous and gay. Okay.
La meg si nå. Jeg kaptein Willem av de gode gamle dager. Hei, fadderi og fadderland. You got all to join in the chorus.
Yeah, go on then. Hey,
Fadderi og fadderland. Vi røver i øst og vi røver i vest med hei, fadderi og fadderland. Vi røver til skutta blir stappende full av salt, mat og søtt, mat og penger og gull. Deretter vi har våre sjørøverfest med hei, fadderi og fadderland. Hei, fadderi og fadderland.
Is that a troll song?
No. Nej, det är snart sjung med fingret havasbua om det folk där.
Sven too was in good spirits when he passed the same way 60 years earlier.
We shouted, sang, and called to each other as we went along. Is this the way to Stockholm? Right-ho, just turn to the left at the second traffic lights. The sun was burning. All of us got very sunburnt that day.
So we've had rather an eventful morning, and we've climbed right up to Grötavatten, from right up over, and then we've come down into a valley, and Bert was having a lot of trouble with his leg. It was really playing him up, and he was getting slower and slower, and we were all getting very worried, and Oddmund decided that maybe we could go down into the valley and get him a lift, and we could take him back to Isfjorden, because he's decided that he really can't go on. But luckily we met a man that Oddmund knows with a wonderful lorry, like a caterpillar. He was up here working, he was just about to leave, and we came around the corner and he said he would take Bert to Isfjorden. And we've just come right up a hill because we're looking for a door that Papa carried. And he was given a door to carry, so that if they were seen by the Germans, they could say, oh, they're going to build a hut.
A tall man crossed the river and approached the barn. In his company were 2 men. I knew them all. They were Hans, Andre, and Karl. Hans and Andre carried rucksacks, skis, and some heavy construction of wood, including a door.
And he let the door stay here. He left the door up on this hill somewhere, and we're searching for it. And apparently it is up here still, but we can't find it. I wonder if this could be it. It's just a couple of planks, really.
With
But
some nails?
60 years, there's a couple of nails, and you see the other side, look. The other side has been...
Yes.
Er det ikke det?
But look where it's been, Lily.
Ja du, den har ligget her, slik som en dør kunne ligge. Men den er veldig gammel. And just for a moment I thought I'd found it, because I found a piece of wood and some nails, and it looked like it could have been a door, but it was very decrepit. But Oddmund thinks no, it wasn't. A little bit of detective work going on here.
The descent into the Eikersdal Valley proved as difficult for Ellie's party as it had been for her father.
There was a steep glacier hanging on to the mountainside and ending in heaps of wild rocks below. Those 2, Arnie and Hans, threw themselves over the edge, sliding down on their boots at tremendous speed. To me, they looked like spiders, dropping down vertically, leaving a thread behind. Andre and I watched them, hearts in our mouths, expecting to see them smashed against the rocks below. But a few yards from the rocks, they made a sharp turn. This broke their speed, and they then jumped from one rock to another as if it were nothing.
Sven continued on his way eastwards towards the Swedish border with the help of relays of local men. Near the village of Finset, he experienced a physical and symbolic separation from his past life, when, at the top of a mountain, he had to inch his way across a canyon on planks.
Soon we came to a deep and narrow canyon at the bottom of which a turbulent river hastened towards the valley below. Now I would see what the planks were for. They were just long enough to make a bridge across the canyon. Edvard tied a rope around his waist and tried the bridge. Then it was my turn, and finally came Nikolai. We parted on the other side of the canyon. Neither of us spoke many words. Nikolai seized my hands, looked into my eyes and said, "Good luck to you. Take care of yourself and don't take any chances. Remember, it's all up for you if they get you. And when you arrive in Sweden, please send me word so I know you are safe." He said it so sincerely, so warmly, that I felt I had never had a better friend than this gentleman of the valley, whom I had known only for 30 hours. Nikolai and Edvard crossed the bridge again, took the planks away, and were out of sight. Literally, the bridge was cut behind me. There was no retreat. My way was clear. Onwards to Sweden. Mrs. Finset told me later on that she had never known her husband more happy than when, 2 months later, he got my letter from Stockholm.
We've just come up by car and we're standing above the river where Papa crossed with Nikolai Finset, who came up with his friend, and they brought the planks down for him to cross the river, which was very full and quite dangerous.
Ellie was surprised that the riverbed was now dried up and asked Viggo Finset, Nikolai's grandson, if this was seasonal.
No, because it has been built out with they're taking the water away to ocean, so it's not so big now.
No.
So earlier it was not possible to access by the foot problem. It's called the Leipoa.
And we can see the big stone concrete where they would have put the planks. And then he said he got to the other side and they went back and took the planks back. And it was at that point that he felt quite lonely because he realised that he was on his own again.
On day 7, Oliver decided to return home. A tearful Ellie saw him off at Donbos.
So there's just the three of us now, and it's a little bit daunting today. I'm still feeling very confident that we can do it, but we've got Linda until Saturday, and then it's Julie and I on our own, and that's quite a daunting prospect. We're both strong, we're both fit, we're both very positive, and we'll look out for each other all the way. And we've decided that if we get to a point where it's just too difficult to go on, and then we'll turn back. And as I've always said, we don't know the way we don't know the area that Papa crossed, so we're just drawing a straight line from the last known point to the border. It's a tough thing that we're doing, but I was reading Papa's book last night and I just realised how much tougher it was for him, and he was on his own at this part and very frightened, obviously very happy to be in the mountains, which he loved, but he was running for his life and it was tough, very, very tough. And I think until we did this, Julie and I, none of us had any idea how tough it was. We had no idea of the feat of endurance that he did. And there were people that we talked to at Akersdal who said that they couldn't believe he'd managed to do it, because it is incredibly tough on your own, with no shelter, very little food, and a long way across the border, across very inhospitable country. So we'll see how today goes. Well, it is the end of a very eventful day. It's Wednesday, the 4th of August. Julie and I are in a tent together, and yes, there are cows outside, and I'm just hoping they're not going to sit on us in the middle of the night and the generator's going, yeah. But we saw the place where Papa crossed the river.
We didn't see the tunnel, but we know whereabouts it was.
And we could see the railway line, couldn't we?
And we know that he was wet by the time he'd got to Foxstua.
Very wet, very, very cold.
And it was raining.
Yeah.
So we had the same sort of weather, didn't we?
It's been quite an experience today, Julie, really, hasn't it, because of that. And we've had this wonderful weather, and today it's been raining, and we climbed.
So we were all three of us feeling really strong and good, very positive.
We had lunch on the top, right at the top, and it was just spectacular because it was very different to what we've been through, the countryside. And it was quite bleak and a very strong east wind. And we got wet, but we've got very good, clothes, very good outerwear. And he describes so clearly in the book the coming out of the ravines and the countryside ahead of him. And then, of course, there was the big mishap.
Yeah.
And it was a serious mishap. When Linda was crossing some scree, she slipped and fell forward, the weight of her rucksack banging her face into the ground. She was badly bruised and lost a lot of blood, and had a suspected broken nose. As the day went on, her injuries worsened, and they eventually taxied her to hospital for examination and an overnight stay.
So that's about it for today. An eventful day. And we are going to be on our own within about 4 days anyway, which is a bit daunting.
We were expecting that, weren't we? But we've learnt such a lot from Linda, and I was hoping to just get a bit more practice on the
compass,
finding bearings on the map. But I sort of feel, as long as we're really careful, we can probably manage with the skills that we have so far.
The next day, the news of Linda was better. She probably had broken her nose, but she was brighter, and after a further 24 hours in the hospital, she took the train to Oslo and flew back to the UK. 10 days into his flight, Sven reached a farm at Nesset, 2,000 feet up in the Rondane Mountains. This was to prove very important for him. It was run by his friends Hjalmar and Inga, brother and sister. But he couldn't be sure the Germans hadn't searched his rooms at Gossen, and, anticipating his likely escape route, weren't lying in wait for him at the farm. He arrived at 5:30 a.m., cold and wet, and he decided to watch and wait, before attempting to make contact with his friends.
I must have fallen asleep, and when I awoke, I saw the door in front of me opening, and Hjalmar came out. He stretched and yawned, then went to the stable. Everything was looking normal, so I pulled myself together, knocked at the door, and went inside. Inga was just coming out of her bedroom. "Good morning, Inga. I want some milk and a drink." "I'll give you some milk," she replied, rather harshly, "but you'll have to keep yourself with spirits." Then she stared at me, her mouth opening more and more, and suddenly she cried, "Sven!" and flung both her arms around me.
Today the weather's been fantastic, and we walked from Björnolea. It was getting to be a bit hard work, so we hitched to South Nesset and found the place where Papa stayed quite a lot. Well, he came here during his escape. He got here. This is the place where he describes he sat outside for a couple of hours in the freezing cold just before dawn. And we've got the place completely to ourselves. And it's quite a strange feeling. Just we feel it's very well earned after our long, arduous walk here. We're just over halfway now. I think well over halfway, actually, probably. But it's very, very nice to think that we can be here for 2 nights with a day in between of just both really needed that good rest, I think.
Sven was to spend 5 weeks at Knesset, hidden in a tent camouflaged with spruce and juniper branches. While he was there, he received from the resistance money, ration cards, an identity card and a passport for the Zone East, both in different names, and a letter written in invisible ink.
The letter told that there had been great joy everywhere in the Romsdal district because I had tricked the Germans. 900 men and some bloodhounds had been sent out in search of me. The informer, Matteson, had also left Molde, dressed for mountaineering, probably in order to help me, but he had returned after a short trip. Everything was well. No one had been arrested lately, and the Germans, evidently, had given up searching for me.
One day, Sven heard a most unexpected sound.
When our father was still alive, he used to whistle a certain signal outside our cottage when he came home for lunch. We also used that signal as a call to each other, and there was a reply to it. It was a strophe from one of the Wagner operas. When my father died in 1923, we ceased using it. One day, as I was eating my lunch in my tent, I heard the family signal being whistled in the forest outside. I whistled the reply, but found it difficult, as I was deeply moved. The whistler could be none other than my brother. I rose to my feet and peeped out. Yes, there was a funny-looking fellow wading through the heather towards my tent. Knowing I had friends here, he went to see Hjalmar to ask him whether I had passed this way on my route to Sweden.
Together, Sven and his brother Knut planned a new route to Sweden.
Everything was much easier now I could send Knud in advance to arrange it. I wanted to contact some of my friends further east in order to arrange my crossing of 3 big rivers, the Glomma, the Rena, and the Clara. The bridges would probably be closely guarded, so I would have to be taken across in boats.
The visitors' book at Knesset held some surprises.
We've looked in the visitors' book this evening, way back to 1947, and lo and behold was Papa's signature, visiting with his wife Ulau, his first wife, and then 2 years later visiting with Primrose Tozer and her friend Pam Russell, and that's of course our mother, who later married Papa, and that's very intriguing. So he must know this place really, really well, and I can really feel his presence. Do you, Ellie? I do. It has been really very, very extraordinary just being here, the 2 of us. I think there's some sort of fate about this.
During his stay at Knesset, Sven was reminded that whilst he was struggling to gain his own freedom, the war was still being fought on a much wider scale. He heard a plane approaching.
I knew that the paratroopers in the mountains were expecting a drop of supplies. It was a British plane, and was to me a sign of the friendship between our people, and also a symbol of freedom and justice. This connection was the lifeblood of the Norwegian resistance movement, and I knew it would grow stronger with every day until it would smash the swastika into pieces and remove it forever. The plane disappeared, and I knew its job was done. My unknown friends in the mountains had got their supplies.
We left Nesset this morning very sadly, with the 10:40 bus, which came bang on time and was totally empty. And we took the bus to Alpnabrua.
So Ellie and I, we're prepared now for a long slog today after our day of rest. We're both feeling quite strong, but our rucksacks are very heavy, really, really heavier than they have been before, because we've packed extra food, because we're expecting 5 days of hard slog now. And even then, we think we probably won't get quite to the Swedish border. We'll be within about 20 kilometres, which we feel okay about, because the purpose of the walk was to follow in his footsteps as much as we could, which we've done, to speak to the people on the way that are still alive and knew him and helped him. And we don't know where he crossed to the Swedish border, so I feel it's sort of slightly irrelevant, really. I mean, we've achieved our sort of main goals of this walk, I feel, and more. So it's been a real revelation to me. I think we both feel we've sort of got a bit closer to Papa the man.
Well, we're coming towards the end of the day, and the sun is setting behind us. And we're heading east now, and we've had an extraordinary day, really quite tough today. But we have left the mountains behind us, which is really lovely, and we're almost off the 4th map, which is wonderful, and we feel that tomorrow morning we'll walk on to the next map. But we are heading east now, very much towards the border, and we can see literally for, well, a long way, because the night is so clear, but that could well be the border way over in the distance.
It's looking very flat over there, and then just a little tiny bit of mountain.
In front of me, to the east, were the mountains I was to cross, rising 4,000 feet. Somewhere past the highest edge was my target for tonight, a small timber hut. I was now in the land of the paratroopers, my unknown friends. I might meet some of them, if they happen to be on the move tonight, or I might happen to see their camp. But most likely, I would see nothing at all.
Well, last night we eventually got down to the river, but we had a really difficult time. We went about 6 kilometres out of our way, so last night I was just too exhausted to talk. But we know that tomorrow we have a long slog over the last bit towards Västerdalm, but we are exactly where we had planned to be on this night. It is lovely and cosy, actually, and we're both longing for a hot bath. Roast chicken, apple juice, some grapefruit, tinned grapefruit with sugar. Ooh,
Coffee with milk.
yeah, and some lemon curd, and somebody to rub our feet, and a soft bed to fall into with lots of pillows, and maybe even a dog or two. So,
a change of clothes.
Yes, some clean clothes, because we whiff a bit.
Speak for yourself.
No, there is no getting away from this, Yuli. We do whiff a bit. Healthy whiff, but we whiff. Well, this is our final day of walking, and we left our campsite at 9 this morning, just after 9, and we've done it's been a heavy morning, beautiful day again, and we had the whole morning for about 4.5 hours. We've walked mostly upwards, which has been really hard going, and I must admit I didn't sleep at all last night, and very uncomfortable, very cold, So I'm quite tired. In fact, we've had enough, really.
The two women trekked on for another 6 days. They walked in bear and wolf country, through ancient reindeer passes, across rivers, and along narrow paths clinging to the sides of mountains. They followed the compass, but they were often lost in woods and bogs. They suffered with painfully swollen feet and blisters, like their father had, but he had also endured driving rain, snowstorms, and freezing dense fogs, spending days soaked to the skin.
And now we've come down towards Årsjön, where Papa met up with a man called Semming, who was to take him to the border, or near the border. And he describes the wood, and he describes how wet he became, because it was raining and it was very foggy and misty, and he was afraid that he was going to be late for the meeting. And Julie and I are just working our way down now to the path that he went along, which will be very poignant actually, because it's our last bit of our journey, and it was for him as well. So it's quite interesting, and we're now really following in his footsteps for the final bit.
Sven's successful passage to the border now depended on his brother's arrangements working out as planned. Peder, the final contact, was to guide him close to the border.
A man came up to me. He was dressed according to the description my brother Knud had given me. Poor man. He was completely soaked by the rain. We said good evening to each other and stopped for a chat, as wanderers used to do when they met in the mountains. I opened up my cigarette container and offered the man a cigarette. On top of the cigarettes was the little piece of paper which Knud had given me, and which should match up with the piece sent to Peder. The man took the counterpart from a pocket and studied both slips solemnly. Then he looked up and said, "I see you are the right person." Upon which he turned and led the way down to the river.
From this point he was on his own, following detailed instructions to look out for a particular satyr.
Somewhere, hidden in the fog ahead of me, was a small satyr. I walked and walked without seeing it, nor did I see any sign of the border. Then, there was the satyr. My path was sloping down slowly, and I was in the forest again. This had to be sweet. There was no other possibility. I must have crossed the border without noticing it. I found a pine with bushy branches and flung my pistol between them. I wanted the Swedish border guards to find me unarmed. Some ducks were swimming peacefully at the mouth of a small river, and there, 100 yards away from where I came out of the forest, was a low satyr house, surrounded by barns and cow stables. A Swedish satyr. I went up to it and knocked at the door. The door into freedom.
For the wheel to go full circle, there was one more person to meet, Cousin Gerd, who had particular memories of Sven's return to Norway at the end of the war.
I remember when my Uncle Sven came home from England. He came with the same boat as the whole Norwegian government came back from London, and my mother and I went down to the harbour to see the boat come in and meet him. And we saw the boat coming in the Oslofjord as a small ship and getting bigger and bigger. And it was, we were very thrilled to see them all come back. And after he had arrived, we went up to my grandmother's, his mother's place, and that evening he told us the whole story about his escape from the beginning to the end, and it was so fascinating that we were all completely silent, and he told the whole thing, and I remember very much of it from his own telling.
Their mission now accomplished, Ellie and Julie boarded the train for Oslo and the bright lights.
Back in civilization, we're in Oslo, and it's just the most amazing feeling. Just people and smell of food and shops and beautiful day, beautiful weather. There's somebody sitting playing an accordion, and there are people walking around with their children, and it's just, gosh.
Shell shock.
Did we really do this? Yeah. Just so almost as if we're not quite in the land of the living yet. Yesterday we were on a mountain, and here we are in Oslo.
Yesterday we were on a bus, Ellie.
No, it was the beginning of the day. Beginning of the day we were on a mountain.
Yeah. That was very early in the morning, wasn't it?
Well, we've come down to a river outside Oslo, and we've lit a fire, Julie and I, and this is really for you, Papa, to say that we've done what we set out to do, and now we're having a sort of ceremony to release us from this and to let you go. It's been a huge undertaking for us, and in a way we now know, perhaps because of what you went through physically, but then we can't begin to know what you went through emotionally, in fear. And we've learnt an awful lot more about the story and our perception of you as a man has grown enormously, and the people that we've met have all said what courage you had and how much they loved you. And we've chosen this spot because it's a river and it symbolises you, and it's Norway, and it's our farewell, really, in a way, and our thankfulness that you've helped us do what we set out to do. And in a way I feel you've been there all the way with us.
For me, we've had a chance to delve right back to our roots, and that's been a great healer, I feel. I feel that we're at the point now where we can just let go and continue on our happy ways. It's brought me new friendships, and particularly with both my siblings, and that seems of enormous importance to me. It's made me feel closer to you, Papa. It's helped me to think through all that you went through, and I've also had a feeling for the Hungarian soldier who lost his life as a result, and I feel that his spirit has somehow been entangled in this. I think it's time that he was not entangled anymore and left, to go to wherever he needs to go. We want to acknowledge that he suffered greatly. He was already suffering before you even escaped, Papa, because he worked. He'd been awake for so long, and it was inevitable that he would fall asleep, and inevitable that he would be shot and would suffer. And if it wasn't you, it might have been somebody else who'd escaped. We want him to be happy and go wherever he needs to go. We've delved deeply. This adventure it's given us the opportunity to do that, which is something very unique, very, very, very special. And perhaps it'll draw a line under lots of things for us and for Mum as well. And we would like to offer up a little sacrificial burning of our dirty old socks, which we thought you would enjoy. It has quite a lot of meaning. I'm very fond of my socks and they're very smelly. But I'm quite happy to burn them as a little present to you. You can wear them wherever you are. They're very comfortable, Papa. And we have your shoes. Goodbye, socks. Bye-bye, Journey. And bye-bye, Papa.
And now we let you go, Papa. And we say thank you. Och så må du vila i fred, min käraste pappa.